For our third In Conversation session this evening, we'll be chatting to the team behind the project Machine's Eye View, which brought us along the journey of a self-driving car. So I'd like to welcome the artist Peter Nash, whose recent exhibitions include The Future is Not Necessarily Set in Stone in Studio 12 Blackwater Artist Group in Cork, and I Remember Nothing, I Remember This in Garter Lane Art Centre in Waterford. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Martin Mullins from Lero, the Science Foundation Ireland Research Centre for Software. So Martin, I might start with you for this panel. So artificial intelligence is already very ingrained in our day-to-day use of technology, from the spam filter on our emails to recommendations for what film we should watch next on Netflix. And I've heard you mention previously that as cars move towards greater automation and move towards being self-driving, that the car will have to make certain ethical decisions independent of the driver. Now, your research group has employed philosophers to work on the applied ethics of this technology. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the ethical considerations that Peter has interpreted so wonderfully in the Machine's Eye View project.
Yeah, Hannah, hi, nice to be here. So yeah, it's great to work with Peter, really fantastic experience, so thanks, Peter. So what we see in Peter's art is we see a vehicle programmed to navigate the world. It's programmed to have an ethic of responsibility, which is interesting in itself. We see the vehicle using the data set that Peter posited, taking care of vulnerable people, adopting a precautionary approach. If we zoom out for a second, for the last 400 years or so, probably since Kant, human beings have been this kind of the center of the moral universe. Only humans had this kind of power to make moral decisions. So it's going to be interesting over the next decade or two that we're going to see a migration of ethical decisions away from people towards machines, and in particular towards automated vehicles. And I think that's what Peter captured really well in his artwork. I think it's really fantastic. So coding, I think, from the Lero perspective, coding is going to become a philosophical as well as a technical challenge, and it's going to be an interdisciplinary space in the future. So we're going to have coders and philosophers working together in challenges like the automated vehicle challenge.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Martin. I've heard it described before as a human being in an unexpected encounter in a car reacts, but a self-driving car will make a decision that has been pre-programmed there. So I suppose that's really interesting that you'll say the philosophers will be involved in the coding of these cars to make sure that everything's ethical. There's a huge amount there. So Peter, we can clearly see that there was a huge amount for you to be inspired by throughout this project, from the research of Lero, from the actual working of the autonomous vehicles, to how the self-driving car sees the world around it and maps its environment. And also then, as Martin was just speaking about, the ethics behind how the cars are programmed. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your creative process behind this project and how you incorporated these elements into the work that we saw this evening.
Yeah, hello Hannah, hi Martin, it's good to be here, thanks everyone. There was a lot to take in from the very beginning really, even just from initially chatting to Martin and Claire there as well at Lero. There was so many elements, like all these things about morality, and like what Martin's talking about, philosophy, and these are like complex things to try and get into, what was a discovery science, for aimed at primary learners. There's quite a lot to get into that. So I kind of initially had this idea that I would like to make some kind of like sculpture or something with a self-driving car driving around. And then we spoke about that, and actually Claire and Martin put me onto this, told me about this experiment called Ducky Town, and I looked at that, and I looked at a few different kind of experiments, and they all had this very, I don't know, kind of like scientific aesthetic, if that makes sense. Like they were all kind of, they weren't especially engaging, I suppose, was because they were to do a certain thing. So anyway, we kind of, yeah, so I had this idea really that I wanted to make this thing just immersive and engaging. And then it made sense to use this aesthetic of like kind of stop motion animation and 3D sets and model making and like storybook kind of imagery, because it was a language that was understandable to our target audience. So the idea was to just sort of bring everything into that. And so I incorporated elements of making, and there was drawing as well. Like we spoke at the beginning of the project, mapping, it became apparent, was like really important, especially in terms of self-driving cars and the way artificial intelligence is going on with computers. Like if you think about how often we use something like Google Maps, for example, like all the time. And so to try and get children or primary learners just to engage with the notion of mapping and placing themselves in an environment, like that became very important. And so I really wanted to get that into the final work. So yeah, this could be quite a long answer now. I've just realized I've kind of got a long way to go still, but so yeah, there was a lot. And then yeah, so that was kind of where we started from. And then just a lot of different conversations about the way about trying to get all this stuff in. And then eventually it became, I just had to start making it and let it really develop from there. So once I started making, then we kind of just let it lead somewhere then.
And I think you absolutely have achieved showing all of these really quite complex kind of ethical decisions in throughout your immersive world. It's really, and to do this all in a way that's, as you said yourself, is kind of appropriate for primary school learners is a huge, huge achievement. So also, I'd just like to introduce, we have Claire here from Lero as well, who's the Education and Public Engagement Manager. So welcome, Claire. Peter, I have one more question for you, actually. So your project went through a bit of an evolution over the past few months. So I know the original plan was for a stop motion animation, but due to the COVID-19 restrictions, you weren't able to get to your studio to film. So actually, we have a sample of the stop motion video that you kindly provided us with that we would love to show. So we might show that now, actually. That's okay, we should have the right video ready to go. Perfect. Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. We can see that you're a really, really skilled animator as well. And I just wanted to ask, what would you see as the power of that animations and kind of immersive worlds such as this one that you've created in the series have in communicating challenging topics?
I think it's like I was saying earlier on, that it's a language that's understandable, or like it's on, you know, you're from an early age, we'll be watching cartoons or looking at, you know, picture books and things like that. And especially with animation and with stop motion animation, you can do things that are actually, like, they're impossible. Because I do make sculptures as well, and kinetic sculptures, and sometimes with that kind of thing, like, you really have to engineer them, otherwise it just won't work. But with animation, you can just do one thing, like, you know, you take your shot, cut, you do something, and then you just take your other picture, and then you've made something happen that just couldn't have happened otherwise. And then I think as well, when it's with like the material choices I made, and I had this aesthetic of it being kind of handmade, like I wanted it to look like maybe like a child had made it or could make it. Like I have this kind of, I've had this sort of running thought for the last couple of years actually about with what I'm making, that if something looks like it has been made by a person, then you know that it can be made by a person. And I think there's something either empowering or at least reassuring in that, you know, you kind of know that that's possible. And I look like I like looking at things as well that I have no idea how I would even start making those, you know, like I think that's amazing as well to see something where you just go, that looks impossible to me. But then I really engage with things where I look at them and I start just trying to figure out how it's done. So
that's really interesting that you would say that as well about I love that point about, you know, if it looks like it's made by someone, it can be made by someone, because the educational resource to go along with this project is actually for students to make their own environment for a self-driving car. And I remember as well, Peter, the first time I saw your piece, I remember feeling like I was almost in a children's drawing. Like, the aesthetic is so amazing. It's absolutely fantastic what you managed to do with this. I actually have one more question for Martin and Claire as well. So I was wondering, so I might go with I might kind of, there's kind of two aspects to this, but I feel like you'll both be able to answer really, really well. So Martin and Claire, with future technologies such as driverless cars, that they may have a really profound impact on our lives if in years to come. And I know, Martin, I think you mentioned before that, you know, this was originally directed towards primary learners who will be the drivers and passengers of the future, and also the coders of the future. Would you see collaborations with artists such as this one as being part of the process in designing new technology such as this? And for Claire, I suppose, with would you see collaborations such as this being involved in engaging with the public about these technologies?
Yeah, so I'm actually really passionate about this mix of art, philosophy, science, ethics, applied ethics, if you like. And Peter used the word empowerment, and I think that's an important part of this. Because we're publicly funded scientists, so we have a duty to communicate to people at their level. That includes school children. So if you think about the demographics that are going to be most affected by, you know, AI and robots in the future, it's precisely kids at primary school now, because they'll probably never drive. They'll be sitting in robot cars in the future. They need to understand what the risks are. And you were on the call with us last week. I thought that was really lively, and it was fantastic. So how often do scientists get access to 9,000 school children in one session? And the chat, I know you were following the chat as well, but
Yeah.
it's really lively. Like they're really engaged by Peter's work. They're really interested in this type of material. Robot cars, making a good car, the ethical car. These are really accessible areas for kids to get into, but they're also really important because they're citizens of the future, and this is a public policy matter, and people need to kind of plug in as early as possible.
Absolutely, that's an excellent point, Martin. And Claire, I wonder if you have any thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge emphasis now on, you know, designing things for the end user where you're including a broad spectrum of people. So, you know, we all have these great examples of software that was designed in the past for, you know, the men and the seatbelt, and we could go on and on. So, you know, we've come to a stage now where really the importance of input from diverse variety of people is just hugely important, and it's necessary, you know, because we have these systems that, you know, we hear a lot about AI bias and all of that, and, you know, that's current, you know, that's an issue that we have at the moment. So, you know, this idea of bringing in lots of people into this process is really important. And, you know, it's one thing to talk about software, but if you talk about ethics and software, you know, that's a whole other layer on top of it. You know, it's almost an abstract thing. But I think with Peter's work, what's happened is it's kind of slowed us down a little bit, and it slowed the kids down, because everybody knows about Teslas, and, you know, the kids are all up to date and they think they know everything about software. But, you know, I mean, the stop motion animation was, you know, designed initially, but, you know, looking at those pictures, and when we showed it last week, you know, the screen at a time, it was slowing us down and slowing the kids down to actually get a concept of what the car might be trying to process, you know, because software is so quick now and everything's so computed so fast. So, you know, I think that kind of, this project for us has really allowed us to kind of get inside the mind of the vehicle in a way that was accessible to the kids. And the kids were coming up with fantastic questions, and they were really interested, you know. So I think for us, this is a huge opportunity, and I think it's great. We'd like to do lots more of this in the future, and I think it's really important that we do it as well. Like Martin said, you know, we have an obligation to do it.
Absolutely, and it's great to hear that this this may not be the end of this project, and that you're going to continue engaging with schools on this. It's absolutely fantastic.